topic that's on its face, you can always say we want to limit the scope of government. That is the bumper sticker on my car. That is everything I shout at on Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. That is a main conservative talking point. But it really becomes a talking point when we decide not to explain it all. And we just say, limit the scope and limit the size of government. And, that does scare some people. And in my effort to try and explain the principles of conservatism, you can't just say, I want to minimize the size. So when people who view government as helping people, if that's their job in their mind to help people, I want this entity that some believe is an efficient tool to help people, and I want to minimize it. And that to them is just hearing, oh, this guy just wants to not help poor people and doesn't want equal rights for everyone and doesn't want all these protections they believe the government is supposed to give us. So instead of just saying limit the scope, maybe we should define what ought the government do. What is their job? What value can they provide? Can they provide it better than, let's say, an alternative, a free market? What can they do? What are they good at doing? And maybe even a little bit, what do the founders intend them to do? I know we always say, back in the founders, and, they're all perfect people apparently, which, it will get thrown back in your face when some of these founders, fell short of, I think, the American experiment that they originally set in place. So to define that job, I guess, define what does that scope look like? And then how do we do all of those activities in that scope efficiently, competently, and move it forward without just wasting a bunch of tax dollars and having these these obligations of the government be used as a political tool rather than an actual source of good, which it's obviously its intended purpose is supposed to be. So that's something I'd love to talk about.
So the question that I just wrote down is that whenever we talk about, and I'm with you whenever it comes to, whenever we say scope, really we're just talking about what is the government doing, right? So the question is, like you said, a lot of people hear it as, I don't want X thing to be done, as opposed to, I don't think the government is best at doing this thing. In other words, it's, I want this to be done, I just don't think that it's the job of the government to do it. But before we get into that, whenever we talk about limiting the scope, let's tease out first a little bit the question of why. Why would you want to limit the scope of government in the first place? I have like a little bit of a thought, like a metaphor in my head, but I want to hear your thoughts on that first. Like, why would we want to do that in the first place?
Yeah. So to me, and it's always easiest, I guess, for most conservatives, this is the easiest way to explain things, is always what's the alternative? What would take its place if the government was no longer allowed, if it was not in the government scope to do this thing? And a lot of times the answer is a free market economy or capitalism. This is a lot of people like to refer to it. I normally refer to it as a free market because it describes the behavior of people in that marketplace. So if the free market can give us these things much more efficiently, effectively, at a lower cost than a centralized entity like the government can, it doesn't make sense not to do it that way. And when you have a centralized government, we like to, I would say us conservatives are the people who want to limit the scope, always use that centralized power, and they use terms like the government gun, this forceful language to kind of show how, evil this centralized power can be. I'm not trying to say all government is bad or government is evil. I actually think most of the government is made up of good people who do want the best for the people. They just don't know how to do it. Or I use the word ignorance. They're ignorant of how a more efficient, effective way can be. And they try to use and implement these things like, the war on poverty that is supposed to result in less poverty that actually really resulted in more poverty and more dependence on the state. When we can use alternatives, to me, the alternative is the government. The real solution is, most of the time some sort of free market solution. So let's say, trying to help poor people out of poverty. We know for a fact that the free market has pulled more people out of poverty worldwide than any centralized power or government program ever has. So the argument that we keep pushing against that, because we're kind of scared. I mean, I think it's the security blanket that a centralized power can give you that makes people say, I would rather feel secure that, I have this big body of, pooled taxpayer money to help back me, rather than, I'm dependent on this market. I know markets can crash. I know markets can go down. It really depends on a lot on the consumer and other worldwide activities, especially when it's an international market. And it's that trade for security. We're trying to get rid of a little bit of liberty. You can put it in terms of accountability. I know I don't want to blame people or say no one wants to be held accountable, but in reality, your well-being is your responsibility. When you start to push it off or believe it's on someone else's responsibility, who does that? Our children do that, and we don't want to be treated as children by the government. We're taxpayers. We do pay into the system. We want to make sure that we can benefit from it. And the reliance and the centralized power kind of is that parent to us. That's kind of the vision we're beginning to see. I think it started, it started a while ago, but you can always kind of give the origins in the 60s where you have large government programs. Again, the war on poverty started then. It's just that belief system that this is the way we ought to do it. And to be fair to them, a lot of the world does it this way, but sometimes it's better to be unique. We say America is so much different than everyone else. Why aren't we the same? Well, America's pretty good at a lot of things. Maybe we should remain unique. But getting away from that thinking that I need the centralized power to make my life better rather than allowing me to make my life better. And that's something great a free market does. So that's why I would like to limit a lot of the scope and abilities that the government can do and or I would say things they can help the people with, rather than allowing them and giving them the best ability to help themselves, I think is the important part.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot there. So whenever you said the people want that warmth, being wrapped around them, I thought about in the movie Gangs of New York. It's a great movie. And Leonardo DiCaprio is, he starts working for this mob boss guy who killed his dad, and he basically wants to kill him. And he starts kind of realize that he's, starting to really kind of care about this guy. And one of the things he says in one of the voiceovers is, that's the thing about sleeping beneath the wing of a dragon. It's a lot warmer than you'd think. And so I think that, that perspective is at least somewhat analogous to how people can view the government. They don't realize necessarily that it's a dragon. But I would say it's a dragon with an IQ of about 12, but we can get there here in a minute. I like what you said about the government is the alternative. And the thought that I had, when you mentioned the free market and stuff and why we would want to limit the scope, I was thinking about, if I was the foreman on a construction site and I had a bunch of different crews in working, and I'm like, I need this area dug out because this is where we're going to put the foundation, whatever. We're digging this out. We're going to lay these lines. And there is dudes from all these different crews with, shovels in there moving around. And a couple of them were just total morons. They are dropping their everything. Like it's like a slapstick movie, like, Swedish Chef kind of thing. Like I would want to limit the scope of people in that trench digging it out. I would want there to be fewer people there doing it. Particularly, I would want to limit the scope of the responsibility of that really bad crew. I wouldn't want them working on that. It's like, maybe you guys are good over here. Maybe you're not so good at digging holes, but you're really good at pouring concrete. Like, I'm going to send you over there and do that. I want to limit the scope of what this one crew is doing because they're not very good at this one thing, and there are other people that could fill that. So, that's what the thing that came to my mind is, like, limiting scope just means I want people to focus on what they're good at. I want, the government to do what it's good at. And sometimes you don't know until you try, in all fairness. You might not know until you try. But the reason, the saying, you don't reinvent the wheel, like that exists for a reason. If someone's really, really good at something, just, spending inordinate amounts of money to see if you might be 2% better is a little bit silly in my mind.